Welcome back to the Automation Podcast. My name is Sean Tierney from Insights in Automation, and in this episode, I sit down with Rylan Pyciak from Cleveland Automation Systems, a system integrator house, to talk about all things industrial automation, including how do we get more people involved in controls engineering, as well as what are the latest products and technologies people are using. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into my interview with Rylan Pyciak from Cleveland Automation Systems. Rylan, it's great to have you on the show. Now, before we jump into our conversation, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me as well, Sean. Definitely appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, to give a little bit of background, I'm Rylan Pyciak, founder, president of Cleveland Automation Systems, as well as a controls engineer. We've essentially been in business for 10 years now. And ultimately, my background has been controls engineering through and through. Actually started the manufacturing floor myself. Um, a lot of maintenance technician role, a lot of day-to-day kind of supporting, troubleshooting equipment and whatnot. From there, obviously went off to college, got a controls engineering background, did a little stint at Rockwell, also worked at an OEM as well as a system integrator. And then from there, kind of saw the entire picture of manufacturing and decided to go out and start Cleveland Automation Systems myself. So since then, like I said, we've been in business going on 10 years so far. And yeah, it's been great. There's a lot of unique things we've come across in the manufacturing industry, and I'm definitely very passionate, and it's something that's very interesting from my perspective.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. And really, that's our audience, the controls engineers, the really the automation electricians, those electricians who just really get into automation and do that as kind of a specialty, as well as the maintenance technicians and control technicians. Maybe have an electronics background, a mechatronics background, and then get into automation. And so, really great to have you on. And you have a great pedigree. They have different companies you've worked with. You've kind of seen the industry from different angles, which a lot of people don't get that chance to work for a vendor and an integrator and an OEM and on the plant floor. So what really tell us about your company, Cleveland Automation Systems. What do you guys do? What was the purpose in founding it? And really what's your focus?
Yeah, certainly. So Cleveland Automation System is probably the best, term for us as a system integrator, right? We typically have various clients that come to us to solve unique problems. That's anywhere from simple, field troubleshooting, simple service calls we get to complex equipment development, a lot of custom automation, as well as a lot of integration. So really we work pretty much with every clientele across the board. I would say the main one, pretty much the only thing we don't do is oil and gas, but we support clients across various manufacturing industries. And really, we essentially got into business to solve a lot of these complex problems. What I saw from my perspective was a lot of, lack of support for various legacy systems, other challenges that our clients would have where, hey, how do we integrate various components together? So really going into business kind of to solve a lot of those problems. And that's still what we do today, anywhere from upgrading, obsolete components and hardware, software control systems, all the way to developing custom, unique, different kinds of equipment and machinery. So very interesting industry. And our client base is pretty wide as well.
Now, I know with your background, right, there's probably a focus on, like you were just saying, on helping people migrate to the latest generation or to a platform that's going to be stable for them. I know in the pre-show we talked about some of your clients have just a mishmash of controls. And so, and I know a lot of people in the audience, they have to deal with all different types of vendors. And so, just a minute, and we're going to be preaching to the choir here, but when you have one of your customers come to you and say, here's what I got. What's the best path forward? What's some of the things you tell them about maybe not having every vendor on the planet, every control system on the planet in your plan? Well, that would be great for a museum, is not really great for your people because it can be difficult. I mean, people struggle understanding an iPhone, how to use an iPhone and an Android, right? Because they're so different. And if you take that times 5 or 10, it really just puts a lot of stress on the maintenance staff, the electricians, and the engineers on site. So, what's some of the advice you give when you're working with your vendors? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
your customers.
certainly. I mean, I think you hit the nail right on the head there with the iPhone to Android comparison. I use that as well. The biggest things what we like to do, first and foremost, we usually do a site assessment for our clients, and that is coming in and understanding everything within the facility, right? That is, what control systems, hardware, software, motors, kind of everything that makes automation run. Um, and really from there, it's identifying and saying, hey, you have these, 5, 6, 15 different vendor hardware, software platforms in your facility. Which route do you want to go? Obviously, there's some name brands that, all of us understand are primary here, at least in the US that most people use. And really, it's more of an educational thing than anything else with our customers of outlining and saying, hey, you know, to be able to hire somebody, to fill a maintenance technician role, to fill a controls engineer role, not only do they have to bring the skill sets of actually doing that work, they also need to bring along the skill sets of how to support these systems. You look at something such as device net versus Ethernet IP, right? There are, different, I'm going to call it generations, different demographics that grew up supporting that versus what is currently used in market. So, really it's sitting down, talking to our customers, kind of looking at that list we've developed with them and saying, hey, this is everything you have within your facility. Which route do you want to go? What does your current maintenance staff look like? What can you support? As well as what does your infrastructure look like? Because at the end of the day, it's, one, obviously obsolescence is huge. I'm sure we've all been there, right? You have an obsolete hardware software device that goes down. Now you're scrambling to go and find another one, right? Typically on eBay, pulling it off the shelf, potentially opening up and soldering things. Nobody wants to go that route. So it's more so understanding this is the route you should go and a lot of guidance, education on, one, why you should migrate, as well as two, what that's going to look like, from your support and maintenance perspective, where, hey, now you only have one software license to manage, you only have one platform to manage, and it's not, 5, 6 different platforms and somebody's old Windows XP sitting on the shelf that you have to clean dust off of every time. So that's, I'd say in a nutshell, a lot of education, goes into a lot of these conversations.
Yeah, I think about over the years all the times people upgraded and the reasons for upgrading and just the cost of upgrading. There was a lot of people who upgraded in for Y2K when there was no reason to. And but there was a fear factor there, fear, uncertainty, doubt, right? FUD. And so they would do upgrades and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I was just sitting there as a technical person being like, you're wasting your money. You don't need this. And I often see like an end user where they have a storeroom full of every I/O module and every terminal block and every processor and memory card, and it's like, should we update the entire plant? I'm like, why? Not only is everything running smoothly and everybody's trained on it, you have all the spares you could ever use, and this stuff will last forever. Whereas when you're sitting down with an OEM and they're like, well, now I need to do 6 axes and I have to do, coordinated motion, you're like, well, yeah, you're not going to want to use that old stuff, right? We need to get you into the latest stuff where we have these new test axes commands and different things we can do that will just make your development so much easier. Plus, you're going to want tech support because if you go into the new generation, you're probably going to have some questions because you've been using the old generation. So it can really be case. And then I see like a lot of the sensor vendors we have on, they come out with this new sensor that has features that no other sensor on the market has. And so I can see an end user saying, well, we usually use brand X, but brand Y is really killing it. And this is the application brand X couldn't solve. So we're going to go with brand Y. And so it does make sense that, I mean, you can come at this from every different angle, but at the end of the day, I guess, like you were saying, you don't want to have a plant with 15 different things in there and 15 different software licenses. And, it's like just because you're good at Word doesn't mean you're an expert at Excel or PowerPoint, right? And just because you've learned brand X does not mean you're going to be able to pick up brand Y quickly. I know when I started working with Siemens, it was like a huge it was like going from Photoshop to Paint Shop Pro or it was just like a
Uh-huh.
huge change and you really just you're not as efficient when you first start off. So definitely a lot of considerations there. You know, I think one of the things we were talking about in the pre-show was how do you attract young people? Because so many people like us who are getting older, right? And then the people who taught us who are retiring, you know, there's a lot of the younger audience, they've been using a touchscreen since they were my grandkids have never known devices without touchscreens, right? It's
Mhm.
so and so how do what can we do to help get that younger generation in? Because we need to bring before everybody retires who has that knowledge. We gotta get the younger folks to keep coming in, and maybe we won't have as many because systems are more mature, and when I first started, PLCs was still relatively new. Programming PLCs with software was still relatively new, only a couple years, 3, 4 years old. And so, but today we've been doing it for 35 years, 40 years. So, um, we may need less people as the knowledge is easier and the products get easier to use too. But how do we attract younger engineers into this? But I think we would both agree there's a phenomenal industry of automating manufacturing and other things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Honestly, I think some of it from my perspective, manufacturing is almost like a black sheep, right? A lot of people haven't heard of manufacturing. They typically look at it of, hey, it's something either I see on TV or it's how cars are made. But I feel like there are a lot of younger generations that may not just fully understand what we do day in and day out. From the technical aspect, from problem solving, from engineering design, all of the things that go into manufacturing a product, both on our side as integrators, programmers, things like that, but also from support, from production, on the flip side. So, I think there's some of that of actually drawing an awareness to what our industry is and what it does. Um, if I'm being frank, a lot of my first introductory really was just talking to friends of friends, and primarily, older generations of, hey, you're really hands-on, really like to do things like this. You should look at this industry. And if it weren't for those conversations, I probably would have never ended up in this industry either. So really I think it's kind of opening up and saying, hey, first robotics, other, kind of vocational or technical, trades kind of situations when you're in high school, even middle school, of identifying people that are interested in these industries or interested in more, hands-on designing things, building things, and getting in front of those younger generations and showing them, hey, manufacturing is something you can get into. And right, you could pick up a teach pen and move half of a car around with a robot. That's really cool. So I think it's a lot of kind of, not only educational from the sense of educating people, but also just, getting in front of younger generations, showing them what's out there. Things that we like to do. There are a lot of career days at schools. If we can go in and do things like that, any kind of, I guess, community involvement or outreach where you do have middle school, high schools, even vocational schools of having introductories. Definitely love to do that. I mean, I sit on a couple advisory boards. Anytime we have professors that want to invite us in, absolutely will jump on board and say, yes, I want to sit down, show everything what we do, show the awesome pictures, kind of walk them through what you can do, as controls engineers, as mechanical engineers, and really get a better sense of this is what this industry looks like.
Yeah, I think when my kids were growing up, they're all grown up now, have kids of their own. When they were growing up, there was really no inexpensive way nothing inexpensive I really could put in front of them to let them learn, electronics and programming. We had PCs, but beyond that, that's not the way it is today. Today we have, and we've covered them on the channel, is I think one of the best places to start is with the Arduinos. And you can buy kits with lots of electronics. Kind of like when I was a kid, they had 1,001 experiments, right? So you
Yeah.
can buy kits that are $20 or $30. Um, and we've reviewed a lot of the kits and what comes in them, but they come with all kinds of electronics, and then the world's your oyster from there. You can do so many things. but even before you get to that point, I loved and I used to coach Lego League. And for those younger middle school kids, right? Lego League, I had kids in there in fourth grade, right? Learning to do the Lego League stuff. And they do a great job of trying to make it fun. You're plugging like motors onto bricks, onto a computer, and then you're programming it graphically, with, moves and, if you're into motion, everybody, you got moves and how far you're going to go and sensors to tell you when to stop. And I mean, I think it's amazing. But the one thing I found though that is difficult is that, most parents these days they're both working, they don't have a lot of time. They come home exhausted, and so they have an Xbox or a streaming service that is their babysitter, just so they can have some alone time. And I would just recommend, limit that time. Especially with video games these days, everything's a season. And you don't want to miss the next big thing that's happening. And anything from Roadblocks to Destiny or Call of Duty or whatever. But don't limit your kids' time. So when they're bored, they have to pull out that kit and stop playing with it. I was with my grandson recently, and he got grounded. And I said, "Well, I bet your mom, while you can't play video games, I bet your mom will let you create your own video games." And so he got on her computer. He started, designing his own levels and whatnot. It's like, people are going to go for easy, right? But
Yep.
once easy's not there anymore, then they'll look for something else. And now talk to me about how have you worked with the younger Have you done anything with First Robotics or with training? You said you're on advisory councils.
Yeah, yeah. So we've sponsored a few high school competitions as well
Nice.
as some other local high schools that essentially, they're just looking to do introductory into
Yeah,
robotics design. I think it almost goes back to the educational standpoint where, your typical curriculum is pretty standardized now. And a lot of, shop classes, I feel like don't exist at many high schools like they did, 10, 15, 30 years ago. So some of it's conversation, some of it is honestly just where we've engaged with, either prior high school, where I went or other high schools that are interested in that and supporting it, right? Like you mentioned, the biggest thing is funding and finding opportunities. And to your point, yes, nowadays it is hundreds of dollars. It's not thousands or tens of thousands
yeah,
to do that. Um,
exactly.
but that's something I feel like us as companies in the integration world, and just speaking kind of in general, being able to identify those things, from anyone listening, if you are on the integration side, or even if you're on the manufacturing side, of maybe having conversations with, what your current layout looks like, potentially your children or high schools that you worked with, and then going to higher ups and maybe asking for a little sponsorship. I mean, a couple $100 can get quite a few different pieces of hardware and software, and you can start building these things that, allow for that aptitude and that intriguing, design and doing hands-on design. I think opens a lot of doors from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, definitely having good conversations with, like I said, high school students, as well as trying to find other opportunities where you can work with these generations and allow them to have that curiosity. I think that's the biggest thing. Once you get that spark and that curiosity, really just continuing on from that and seeing what other options are out there in the world.
Yeah, and if you're going to sponsor as a company or as a group or as a, organization, um, I would definitely put a requirement in there and maybe go and see the final project because my wife's a principal. She's been teaching for 20 years, and people have sponsored different things that she's tried to implement in her school. And I think the one thing they fall down on is, yeah, they have you fill out a form, they give you the money, so you can go buy the kits, and then they don't get involved. And it's like, people get busy, and if there's not like this requirement that, hey, they have to show, at the end of the season or year or course, we're going to come in and see what they did, just to try to hold their feet to the, not hold their feet to the fire, but just to give the teacher or the instructor some accountability, some reason to make sure that this stuff gets used and covered, because there are so many mandates. So hopefully this will change, but today there's so many mandates that it's difficult. They really have to make an effort to teach outside of what's mandated, which is, and like you said, unfortunately, shop shop class, and basic electricity, those type of things are not mandated anymore, or
Mhm.
not mandated today. But as we're talking about this, if you don't mind, can we switch over and talk about smarter manufacturing? So we've talked a while about how we get youngsters involved, but as you go to work every day, right, and you work with your people and you work with your customers, I mean, what are some of the trends you're seeing out there where people are doing things maybe smarter, or adopting newer technologies that, we didn't have maybe 10 years ago, that are really making a difference in their plants?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. There are quite a few different things that we've come across. There are some buzzwords definitely. I think that you kind of have to sandbox exactly what they are. AI being one of them, right? I think in the general sense, a lot of people may not understand. But there are some, I'm going to call them, AIs such as vision systems, where essentially you're teaching it, hey, here are, passable or passing products, here are failing products, and it's not necessarily how vision systems traditionally were, right? Where it always has to be the same picture. If it doesn't line up, if it's not good, it's bad, right? That's kind of more of the traditional sense. Where some of these newer AI, learning systems that are out there are actually able to detect and say, hey, I may be looking for something to be right side up, and it's within that plus or minus 10-degree window. That's going to be a pass. If I see something flipped upside down, that's certainly going to be a fail. So we're seeing some newer technologies like that definitely being implemented out there. Um, IoT, smart sensors, IO-Link are other ones that are huge. We're seeing a lot of deployments, especially in food and beverage, where you're no longer having to run analog sensors everywhere, but rather, you're basically implementing IO-Link and other similar platforms where now I'm actually getting that process data over Ethernet IP. I don't have to worry about scaling, other things like that. They make field installation and setup time a breeze. We do a lot of that as well. So definitely some newer technologies. And then some other things that say are pretty unique too are more maybe around the robotics, where we're seeing a lot of your ROS and ROS 2 development, where, again, it's kind of more of a open source platform that essentially allows you to run the control kind of independent of what we would traditionally look at from a controller, where, hey, you may have a Fanuc or a KUKA robot that is essentially now running, from a ROS perspective versus your traditional, picking up the teach pen and programming points. So it's definitely interesting. I'd say, we're working on quite a few different applications that are kind of bridging that gap between traditional and newer technologies, where there's a lot more dynamic going on. For instance, an application we're currently doing, essentially we have, a product coming into an area, a couple scanners doing a 3D point cloud, and then robots that are actually going over top of that. That product that's coming in is never the same from one product to the next. So there's a lot of kind of, ongoing smart technology that's feeding in there, vision systems, 3D systems, and that's actually using one of the ROS, approach as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think as our industry grows, there's a lot more interest in it, and there's a lot more funding coming in, private equity, venture capitalists that are starting to try and solve some of these more complex problems. And I think from that, it does allow us to now look at this. Hey, traditionally you would program with a PLC ladder logic and the teach pendant. Well, now you might be able to use more software-based controls and engineering versus, ladder logic programming and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Again, from our standpoint as a system integrator, we get to see so many of these different things going on, that you walk in and you're like, it's pretty neat to see what other people are trying to do out there.
Yeah, we talked about AI quite a bit last year, and in robotics. AI, and I asked the audience to help me. We got to spread the knowledge about AI as far as what it really is. A couple years ago, I was on vacation and we were on a tour and we had these dinners every night. And this older man, he's like, AI is self-aware and they're programming itself and we don't need people anymore. And I'm like, that's a great science fiction book you just read, but I mean, I think if, and you try to explain to them, it's like, look, it's like they published this. IEEE does a great job covering this. literally spend millions every year, like tens of millions every year, programming these AIs. They're not self-aware. They're not, then that people still are needed. That's why they're paying people, millions of dollars to program them. And it's basically, as we look at I always go back to like voice activation, and I should mute my device here so I don't accidentally trigger it. But if we think back, like I bought Dragon Natural Speaking back in the day because I wanted, my old job for 25 years, I spent half or more of every day driving. So 4 hours
Yep.
driving, 7 hours working, or 8 hours driving, 4 hours. It was just that for somebody who likes to do, for a doer, it's just demoralizing to be on the road that much. For a driver, that's great. I mean, they love that. But in any case, long story short, it's 90%, and again, I have an accent, but 90%, you think that sounds great until you go to edit what you said. It's not good, right? It's like too much work. I could just type this from scratch. And we also see that with a lot of transcripts. Like if you're on a video streaming site, the transcripts, the automatic English captions, right? Closed captions. A lot of times they're not that good either. But we've seen that grow. I know when I first got my iPhone and it had Siri, and I would talk to it and be like, "Ah, I can't answer that." Today, I can talk to it and it does a great job. It's the database that has backing it up is so much better. And so I take that and I go into like the vision system example you gave, right? Now, in the past, like you were saying, we had to have the lighting perfect, we had the gauges and the tools, and the product had to be in the same spot all the time, and there was no way for it to float around and find the product and most early on. And today, you can shoot it like 100 products and say these are all good, and the algorithm can figure out, hey, what are the minor variances of these, so I can understand what falls into the good bucket. And then you can shoot at 100 bad products and say, okay, these are bad, and they can actually build some tables or value sets to really know really well, much faster than any person could, what's good and what's bad. And it's amazing. Even one vendor said, "Hey, if you need to train it, do even more training, you can upload it to our website and we'll do it offline and send it back to you," which I just think is amazing. And I know it's revolutionizing, cancer treatment or detection and all kinds of other things. But yeah, no, this is not Data from Star Trek, right? This
Yeah.
is not
Yeah.
Hal from 2001. And yeah, it's so go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're spot on, Shauna. It's a good balance, right? I mean, I even look at it. We've all been there, right? Especially from the controls perspective, where something isn't running, and you walk out, and it's that slight little turn of the photo eye, right?
Yeah.
So, as much as I think a lot of people may look at it of, hey, it's taking over the world and it's taking over what we're doing, it still requires people, in at least in our world, technicians to implement it, to program it, to set it up. And again, a lot of our equipment too doesn't even have that technology. So, it's something that as we move forward educationally, I think, generations that still have a pretty good length of career left, it's making sure you're educating yourself on it, understanding what it is, how to deploy it, utilizing it as it becomes more commonplace, but definitely not, I wouldn't be intimidated by it because it's something that it's like anything else. It's a tool that's going to be used, and I think it's making yourself aware of it, understanding how you can actually deploy it in the future. And something else, I guess, a thought that they brought up from my standpoint is actually investment in this new technology. It's something else that we have a lot of these conversations with customers. I don't automate just happen, right? You go out and you see the latest and greatest of everything, a lot of cool technology, new technology. We always caution our customers to be cautiously optimistic and consider what you're investing in. Because one of the things you have to look at, there are all these crazy new technologies that are out there. I'm going to use collaborative robots as an example, right?
Yeah.
When they first came out, it was universal robots. Now you walk the show, there are probably 50, 100, I don't know, 500 collaborative robots. The thing you have to really consider is not only are you purchasing this technology, you're investing in education, from an internal standpoint to bring your teams up to speed, but you also have to make sure that technology still exists in 5, 10, 20 years. A great use case, we actually did a case study on it. Ready Robotics. I thought it was a great platform, worked really well. Kind of made robot programming agnostic. And they had a really, really valuable, use case, I thought. And, they went bankrupt, they went out of business. So you have to look at that too of, hey, I'm going to go and spend this money as a decision maker for my plant, for my company, for my process. You have to also make sure that that hardware, that software, that firmware, that company that developed that is also there in the long term. So you kind of have to do a pros and cons and make sure really our biggest things, how long have those companies been in business? What does their technology look like? What does their tech support look like? Right? Do they have a team? Is it one individual? Are they writing firmware on the back end as these bugs come up? But it really is a holistic picture. And again, I really recommend having conversations with your personnel that are on the floor supporting this. Reach out to integrators, reach out to individuals within the market, and ask a lot of questions before you make those decisions.
Yeah, and, it's does it work with your existing architecture? So there are so many great cobot and robot manufacturers, and
Mhm.
quite honestly, some of them work better with brand A, and some work better with brand B. And if you have brand B, you probably want one that works really well with it. If you have brand A, then that's going to be a. And I know they all try to work with all. They try to be vendor agnostic as far as the control systems, but some do a better job with. A lot of times it's geographical or it's just the mission of the company internally. But and then there are companies out there who do just do a phenomenal job or try to with all vendors. But I think cobots, that's one place we talk about the younger generation. I mean, you think about it, right? And I worked in a machine shop one summer when I was in high school, and it's a job that young people do not want, right? If you're machining products, right? It's similar to like if an injection molding facility, people don't want to work there either, right? Younger generation, a lot of them don't because they want something more, you know, 2025-ish, right? And
Yep.
so if you can have a cobot sit at that machine and put the pieces in and out instead of a human being, and I can tell you that was very boring work. And most of the people there were not college graduates, right? They were there because they were, it was the best paying job they could find without having any experience. And so as those people retire, if you don't have enough people to fill those roles, that's where the cobots, I think, could do a great job. And there's people even have innovative uses for them. Like this one company it was a 3D printing company. And so they like to work 8 to 5, like most people do. They have families, they want to enjoy their evenings. And the problem was though the printers would finish the print, they would take custom print jobs. They'd finish like in the evening, right? And nobody wanted to drive back to work and switch out the trays so they could print something else, right? Expensive
Mhm.
machines printing expensive products. And so they bought a cobot. That all that cobot does is it goes around and replaces the trays on the 3D printers when they finish their job so they can print something else. And it gives them another, theoretically another 16 hours worth of printing they can get out of their machines while everybody's at home, spending time with the family and sleeping. And so there's a lot of innovative ways to use cobots. Now, have you guys done any work recently with cobots?
Yeah, it's definitely something. We've deployed quite a few collaborative applications.
Yep.
Really when it comes to I'm gonna say collaborative versus non-collaborative, more so we're kind of back to I guess what you just touched on is identifying, what are the problems that you could potentially solve, or honestly, even just walking in and saying, hey, there is a potential solution here that maybe somebody's never thought of. Um, that's identifying, like you said, that right, the 3Ds, dirty, dull, dangerous, where people just it's a boring job, people hate it, it's high turnover. Really kind of finding those applications where it's something simple, it's low cost, it's something you can implement very easily, and then being able to walk in and replace that with a robot, with a collaborative robot, with an automated solution that actually solves those problems, right? And then it takes those individuals from doing that high turnover, boring or dangerous or mind numbing kind of position into something that opens up a lot more doors, and now they can be technicians, they can kind of move into a higher position where they're doing more from the company perspective. But yeah, I mean, in terms of collaborative applications, definitely a lot of opportunity that's out there. I think the biggest things are, obviously identifying what you're trying to do, making sure you do proper risk assessments to make sure that application is actually collaborative, as well as, really finding what are you trying to solve at the end of the day, right? Is it a labor problem? Is it, just an ergonomic problem is definitely a big one we see a lot of. Time saving problems. We deployed one 2 years ago, actually, that essentially just mixing a solution, right? And every 15 minutes, operator have to stop, open up the door, go in there and mix this solution essentially to keep it mixed, shut the door and hit go. Um, that essentially removed that where now that operator is no longer there and actually doing the other pieces of their job. It was a slam dunk for everyone involved. So definitely a lot of opportunities out there. I think really it's identifying what you're trying to solve. But you can definitely utilize them in quite a few different locations.
Yeah, and that kind of brings another thought to mind is, we hear a lot of people say, well, automation is bad because it takes away jobs. And I usually it's a boomer when I see somebody saying this on TV, and not to pick on boomers, okay? But typically it's a boomer, right?
Mhm.
And they're holding a like an $800 smartphone, and they're standing next to a $500 big screen TV, and I'm just like, I'm like, or with those products you love to use, the car you like to drive, that smartphone you love, you know, none of those can be made without automation. Impossible, literally impossible to make your modern devices without automation. Technology, and I like to just say technology gets rid of the lowest level jobs, right? So from the day we learned to tie an ox to that wheel to turn it, so we could either pump water or grind, grain or whatever, right? Or harness the wind with a wind wheel, a windmill. Um,
Mhm.
that we're people are always trying to find smarter ways to doing thing. And not that mixing a container by hand is extremely difficult, but I don't know how many times I've gone to the local home supply store and they've mixed my paint wrong, literally. Or I'll say this too, the same place have my keys made wrong. I have like half a dozen keys I've paid the mad made and they mess them up, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm not picking on people. They're stressed out. They got lots doing. But if I need a key now, I know there's one department store nearby that has the automated. You just put your key in, it does everything automated. I will only go there because I know it's done correctly every time. And quite honestly, I don't have to listen to the sales clerk go, "Oh, I don't like making keys. I can't believe I got to do this." It's just like, yes, I wish you didn't have to do this either because you keep doing it wrong. So,
Uh,
I mean, do you agree with me? Or, I mean, the technology I find is elevating. It's giving people better jobs. It's really eliminating the jobs that most people don't want. Am I right about that? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, honestly, Sean, I think you're spot on with that. Really automation, and I'll even say this, the last couple of years, a lot of our customers, they're asking for automation because they simply cannot find enough people to fill their roles. It's not that, hey, we want to, necessarily improve a process or, replace people. Nobody's actually filling those roles where they don't have enough resources to do that manually. So it's a labor shortage issue, honestly, what we're dealing with. But by no means is it actually taking over, replacing jobs, anything like that. I mean, exactly what you said, right? You look at jobs that are very labor intensive, that are, very stressing, ergonomic issues that, it's honestly, it's backbreaking work. And I definitely understand that. I wouldn't want to do that kind of labor myself, day in and day out, 5 days a week. And that's where automation is key, right? So you now walk in and a robot, a control system, whatever it is replacing those things that are, beating up your body or, other things, very toxic locations that you don't want to deal with chemicals, things like that. Now, those same persons that had to go in and do that are now actually supporting it. And kind of back to what we were talking about before, right? Now those individuals are learning how to operate the HMIs. They learn how to recover the robots. They're learning how to do basic troubleshooting on PLCs, robotic systems, things like that. So, from an employment perspective, from a technology and educational perspective, I think it's taking them from doing a repetitive, laborious job, and now it's opening up more avenues where you could walk in and say, "Hey, I have background." programming, doing basic troubleshooting on this system that has, Fanuc Robot, Allen Bradley PLC. I made edits. We maybe that system you've put in 5 new part variants since you purchased it. So now you have more applicable skills that I think in general our industry needs to head that way, right? As you mentioned, one, to be able to be competitive with the prices of what we pay for the cost of goods sold in general. Um, but two, just from a standpoint of, if corporations and companies are going to try and remain competitive, they certainly are going to have to automate. You're not going to be able to replace and do everything with manual, human labor. And you need to start implementing automation, in the right locations, but also making sure you're implementing it so you can, like I said, obviously fill those labor gaps, fill the labor shortages that you have, high turnover positions or dangerous positions, replace that with industrial automation. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it is definitely not taking people's jobs. I can't say I've seen any project where we walked in and said, "Hey, here's a machine that runs X rate. These 5 people are now gone." Usually, they're moving into higher level positions, technician positions, and honestly, getting more education. So I mean, I'm absolutely on board that automation is nothing but a good investment from a company perspective.
Yeah, and I think back to Beach Nut, they make baby food. And I was working with them when they were building a new plant. And the old plant looked ugly. It was like an old brick building, multi-story. Yeah, I walked through it and I'm like, I don't know that I could ever buy this baby food again. But their new plant was just beautiful. Beautiful. When you walk into the lobby, it's huge and beautiful. You walk in the lobby, they have a mural on the wall. It's like endless, mostly ladies in hairnets, endless table of ladies cutting potatoes and carrots and they're all happy. They're like, yeah, this is great. The kids are in school. I can make some extra money. Maybe we'll buy a new car. They were all pretty happy. It was like they can sit there, they can chat, they can cut the carrots and potatoes, and they're making healthy baby food for the community. And so it was great. Today, I don't think my granddaughter would wanted that job for $1 million. She's never known a time when there hasn't been high screen, high resolution touch screens in her hand or in her mother's hand or in her house, and it's like, why would we do this manually again?
Mhm.
Why would I spend all day repetitively getting carpal syndrome, tunnel syndrome, or whatever? And so that's just where we are. I think most of us see most people who are paying attention to what they're doing, they want to do it better. They want to
Yeah.
improve. It's that continuous improvement, Kanban, all that stuff that talks about, let's keep making changes to make the process better. And you're not every change is for the positive, but I think that's kind of this brings us full circle too, because I there was a technologist recently who was saying, we can import a lot of engineers because we don't have enough engineers. And it's like I replied to him like, we have tons of engineers. What you're really seeing is the schools are not teaching what you want them to learn. Partner with the schools. So, like my youngest son and all these other software engineers out there are not unemployed because the schools didn't teach them what you wanted. You need 1,000 engineers. Go to the local school. Tell them this is what I need your people to learn. Trust me, they'll start teaching it because the last thing a competent school wants to do or college or university is put people out there who can't actually get a job. They love being able to brag about people getting jobs. They love to be able to brag about, hey, I'm working with company Y, and we sent them 1,000 engineers over the last 4 years. So we kind of come full circle. I think we all need to think about that. How can we encourage our local educational institutions? Maybe it's our kids, where our kids are going. Maybe it's where our grandkids are going. Where maybe it's where nieces and nephews or siblings are going. How can we get involved and help those local, everything from grade school through high school through junior college, technical, community colleges and so on. We got to help them understand what we're doing and what's valuable so they can stay away from, maybe saying, hey, the Raspberry Pi is going to take over the world, so that's all you need to learn. No, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I hate to break it to you, but there's a reason why we have major vendors and they've been in business for over 100 years because they make what the customers want. But yeah, that kind of brings it full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it definitely, it, it's an entire ecosystem, right? I think from that perspective, right, from the large corporations that are manufacturing, it is having those conversations and saying, hey, these are the kind of technicians, the controls engineers, the, whatever roles you're trying to fill. This is what we do day in and day out. And those individuals and corporations need to have conversations with, again, the local vocational schools, the community colleges, the technical colleges, even, like I said, even high school and middle school, and outline,
Yeah.
this is what our career path looks like. This is what, right? This is what our process looks like. Honestly, doing site tours, facility tours, understanding how things are made, looking at equipment and working with equipments where, hey, we may have humongous boilers, or I grew up in southern Ohio where steel at one point was very large before it went
Yeah.
overseas. Understanding what that looks like, how electric arc furnaces work and function, and actually working with local community colleges of, hey, this is the kind of technical resources of what we need, right? That's millwrights, it's electricians, it's hands-on labor, whatever that is. And then aligning both what you're trying to fill from a technical perspective with what is actually being taught in those vocational technical community colleges, even back again to high schools where, hey, yeah, PLC programming is great. We actually utilize, like you said, we utilize Siemens or Allen Bradley. We don't do Arduino for, $100 million production facility. So I think a lot of it is, honestly, it's more community involvement. Quite honestly, it's conversations like you and I are having, but on a bigger scale of understanding, hey, these are the skill gaps. This is where we're currently at, and these are the roles we're trying to fill. Because a lot of it, like you said, it's I feel like a lot of people in our industry more often than not kind of stumble upon it, or at least have some in. But if it weren't for that, people really wouldn't know what manufacturing does. So I mean, I would definitely encourage that. Again, kind of back to the advisory boards that I've talked about. We have a lot of those conversations with the local community colleges of, this is what we do, this is what's good. Your training systems, this is awesome. We don't use any of this. And just having those two-way conversations and making sure you're staying involved. I mean, end of the day, communication is key, and I think that's what we all need to do more of.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Rylan, I really appreciate coming on the show. I'm just looking at my list of bullets of things I wanted to talk about. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that we hadn't gotten to yet?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, I think we touched on a lot of great topics. In general, Sean, I'd say, really one of my passions is definitely bringing in younger generations, education into this industry. End of the day, we're all engineers. I think by default, we like to collaborate and have conversations. And really, I'm just trying to encourage more of that, right? Of all of us being able to have open, honest conversations. I know you get onto the forums and you get onto Reddit and all these other, areas of the internet, and it's great because there's a lot of collaborative energy. And honestly, I think it's something we just need to do that more, be more supportive of other individuals, of others in the industry, and keep having these conversations, right? Because the more collective minds we bring together, I think it's going to open up more doors, and it's going to allow us to have, more exciting conversations like this.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rylan, I really appreciate you coming on. Now, if people want to learn more about Cleveland Automation Systems, where would they go to find out more?
Yeah, definitely. You can find us on our website. So it's clevelandautomationsystems.com. I know it's a mouthful. You could also look up myself on LinkedIn, Rylan Pyciak, Cleveland Automation Systems as well as on LinkedIn. But definitely feel free to reach out. I'm always open. I love having conversations like this. So definitely you can find us, like I said, website, LinkedIn. Send me a direct message if you want to talk about something. I'll definitely share my contact info, and we can connect any which way you want.
Yeah, and we'll include all those links in the description. So you guys, wherever you're listening or watching, you'll be able to have access to that so you don't have to type it all in. But in any case, Rylan, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation today. And just thanks again for coming on.
Definitely. And thank you for having me, Sean. I definitely appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. And I want to thank Rylan for coming on the show and talking about all things industrial automation. I really enjoyed our chat. I hope you did too. And I will put his a link to his LinkedIn profile and to his company in the description. I also want to thank Cleveland Automation Systems for sponsoring this episode so we could bring it to you completely ad free. So if you're talking to Rylan or anybody over there, please tell them thank you for us. And with that said, I just want to wish you all good health and happiness. And until next time, my friends, peace.